From a widow's quiet farm concealing a headless corpse to a simple checkerboard serving as a killer's twisted scoreboard, these chilling discoveries inside the homes of the world's most infamous serial killers will leave you speechless. Starting with Belle Gunness. Belle Gunness was the perfect black widow, charming, calculated, and utterly ruthless. To the outside world, she was a hard-working Norwegian widow living on a quiet Indiana farm. However, in reality, she was one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. Between 1884 and 1908, Belle lured men to her property through personal ads promising love and company. But as you'd expect, they got none of that. Instead, they walked straight into their graves. Her scheme unraveled in 1908 when a fire consumed her farmhouse. Inside the ruins, authorities discovered a headless female body alongside the remains of her 3 children. Initially, everyone assumed that it was Belle, but later investigations revealed that the body was a good 5 inches shorter than Belle's tall frame. Suspicion grew when one man, searching for his missing brother, convinced the police to dig on her property. What they found was beyond comprehension. At first, they uncovered burlap sacks. Inside, there were hacked-up body parts, hands, feet, and skull fragments. Then, the real horror set in. Shallow graves were found throughout her property, hiding over a dozen victims. Some were men who had answered her ads, and others were women and children. Each body had been butchered with a chilling precision, heads and limbs removed, bones broken and wrapped in flesh that had begun to rot. Some skulls bore the marks of blunt force trauma, and others had deep gashes. It is said that after the police found the first 5 dismembered bodies, they stopped counting. Belle's hired hand, Ray Lamphere, later confessed to helping her dispose of bodies. He claimed she had murdered the children herself before setting the fire and vanishing. Even today, no one knows for sure if Belle perished in the flames or disappeared into the night to kill again. Next up, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, lured at least 33 young men and boys to his home between 1972 and 1978. Posing as a businessman and part-time entertainer, he gained their trust before trapping them in his house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, Chicago. Gacy would restrain his victims, often under the ruse of performing a magic trick, before subjecting them to rape, torture, and ultimately murder. Most victims were strangled with a garrote or asphyxiated. The investigation into Gacy began with the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest in December 1978. Police linked Gacy to the missing teenager and, after obtaining a search warrant, uncovered incriminating evidence in his home. This included several police badges, syringes, a starting pistol, a pair of handcuffs, pornographic films, and underwear too small to fit Gacy, among other things. Following this search, Gacy was put under constant surveillance, which led him to behave erratically. The first search was followed by multiple accusations of sexual assault, which led authorities to secure a second warrant, suspecting human remains on the property. During their second search, the police officers uncovered a rancid smell, which they suspected was coming from decaying bodies. However, it wasn't after Gacy's drunk confession, which led to his swift arrest, that the police uncovered the extent of his crimes. This led them to search his house once again, but this time with full force. And what they found shocked the nation. The crawl space beneath Gacy's house contained 26 decomposing bodies stacked in shallow graves. 3 additional bodies were found elsewhere on his property, and 4 more were discovered in the Des Plaines River. Gacy was arrested and was convicted in 1980. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 1994, leaving behind a legacy of horror and unanswered questions. Next up, Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a calculated and meticulous serial killer who operated across the United States, targeting victims at random to avoid detection. Unlike many serial killers, he did not have a specific victim profile, selecting his targets based on opportunity rather than preference. He frequently stalked campgrounds, trailheads, cemeteries, and remote locations, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Keyes funded his nationwide murder sprees through bank robberies and carefully hid caches of weapons, restraints, and money in various states to use in future crimes. Keyes' reign of terror came to an end in 2012 when he was arrested for the abduction and murder of Samantha Koenig, an 18-year-old barista from Anchorage, Alaska. He had kidnapped Koenig from her workplace, held her captive, and murdered her before using her debit card at ATMs across multiple states. Investigators tracked the transactions and apprehended Keyes in Texas. While in custody, he confessed to at least 7 other murders, including those of a Vermont couple, Bill and Lorraine Currier. Keyes' murders were marked by extensive planning, and pictures of his murder kits shocked everyone. Before killing the Curriers, he flew from Alaska to Chicago in June 2011, rented a car, and drove 1,000 miles to Vermont. He spent 3 days scouting the area, even purchasing a fishing license to maintain an appearance of normalcy. Keyes specifically looked for a house with an attached garage, no car in the driveway, no children, and no dog. Unfortunately, the Curriers fit his criteria. Breaking into their home, Keyes abducted the couple and transported them to an abandoned farmhouse he had identified earlier. He restrained them with plastic zip ties before brutally beating Bill Currier with a shovel and shooting him. Lorraine Currier was sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Their bodies were never found. Keyes later admitted that he would fly to random locations, rent a car, and drive hundreds of miles to avoid detection. The FBI released a timeline of 35 trips he made between 2004 and 2012 across the US, Mexico, and Canada, during which he likely committed additional murders. He claimed that one of his victims had been recovered, but their death was mistakenly ruled an accident. During searches of Keyes' home, investigators found extensive evidence of his crimes. His property contained maps, notebooks, and research materials detailing his murders. Most chilling were his hidden murder kits, buried in various locations across the country. These kits contained firearms, zip ties, duct tape, disguises, and tools to dispose of bodies. Authorities located 2 such kits, one in Alaska and another in New York, and believe more remain undiscovered. Despite his confessions, Keyes remained evasive about the full extent of his crimes, teasing investigators with vague details while refusing to disclose all his victims. He took his own life in his Alaska jail cell in December 2012, leaving behind unanswered questions and a trail of unconfirmed murders. Next, Ed Gein. Ed Gein, an unassuming handyman from Plainfield, Wisconsin, shocked the world when authorities uncovered the grotesque horrors hidden within his farmhouse. And that's definitely an understatement. Continue watching to know why. Ed's crimes came to light on November 16, 1957, following the disappearance of Bernice Worden, the 58-year-old owner of a local hardware store. Her son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, became alarmed when he discovered the store abandoned, the cash register missing, and bloodstains leading out the back door. Suspicion immediately fell on Gein, who had been seen in the store the previous evening and was expected to return that morning for a gallon of antifreeze. Authorities arrested Gein later that evening and searched his home, where they made a series of gruesome discoveries. Bernice Worden's decapitated body was found in a shed, hanging upside down with ropes at her wrists and a crossbar at her ankles. Her torso had been dressed like a slaughtered deer, and her heart was found in a plastic bag near the stove. Inside Gein's house, investigators uncovered a nightmarish collection of human remains, repurposed into household objects. Skulls were mounted on bedposts, bowls were fashioned from skull caps, and a lampshade was made from a human face. Authorities also found a belt crafted from female nipples, a corset made from a woman's skin torso, leggings sewn from human leg skin, and masks created from the faces of his victims. In a paper bag, they discovered the face of Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who had vanished in 1954, along with her skull in a box. A shoebox contained 9 preserved vulvas, some believed to belong to teenage girls. Under questioning, Gein admitted to murdering Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, though he later claimed not to remember the details of Hogan's death. He also confessed to exhuming bodies from local cemeteries between 1947 and 1952, selecting corpses of middle-aged women who resembled his mother. He tanned their skins and used them to create a woman suit, hoping to embody his mother, whom he obsessively idolized. However, he denied having sexual relations with the corpses, claiming they smelled too bad. To confirm Gein's claims, authorities exhumed several graves he had robbed. The findings corroborated his confession. Some caskets were empty, others contained only a few bones, and in one, Gein had returned jewelry and certain body parts. Despite his disturbing admissions, Gein's initial confession was ruled inadmissible after Sheriff Art Schley assaulted him during questioning, slamming his head against a brick wall. The horror of Gaines' crimes deeply affected the community and law enforcement. Schley, reportedly traumatized by the case, died of heart failure in 1968. Gaines was declared insane and committed to a mental institution, where he remained until his death in 1984. Shortly after his arrest, Gaines' farmhouse burned to the ground, likely set ablaze by locals unwilling to see it turned into a museum. Though he was only convicted of 2 murders, his crimes inspired numerous horror films, including Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. Next, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, was responsible for the brutal murders of 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. His crimes were characterized by horrific acts of dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism, creating a shocking legacy that horrified the world. Dahmer's killing spree came to an end on July 22, 1991, when he lured 32-year-old Tracy Edwards to his apartment under the pretense of offering him money in exchange for posing for nude photographs. Once inside, Edwards noticed a foul odor and saw several bottles of hydrochloric acid on the floor. Dahmer attempted to handcuff him and threatened him with a knife, but Edwards managed to escape and flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers. When officers Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller arrived at Dahmer's apartment, they were met with an eerie calm. Dahmer initially cooperated, admitting to handcuffing Edwards but giving no explanation. However, when the officers searched the bedroom for the handcuff key, they found a collection of Polaroid photographs depicting dismembered bodies in various stages of mutilation. As soon as the officers released the images that had been taken in that very apartment, they moved to arrest Dahmer. He resisted, but was quickly brought under control. What police discovered inside apartment 213 was a house of horrors beyond imagination. In the refrigerator, officers found a freshly severed human head resting on the bottom shelf. As they searched further, they uncovered 3 additional severed heads inside the kitchen. The freezer contained a human torso along with various organs, all carefully wrapped in plastic bags. A tray of blood drippings was also found inside. The bedroom held even more shocking findings. Investigators discovered 7 skulls, some bleached and others painted, stacked in a closet and displayed on shelves. A blue 57-gallon drum in the corner contained 3 dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution. Dahmer had been attempting to dispose of his victims' remains using chemicals, leaving behind a gruesome scene. Further examination revealed even more disturbing items. 2 full skeletons were recovered, along with a pair of severed hands, 2 preserved male genitalia, and a mummified scalp. Investigators also found a collection of 74 Polaroid photographs, meticulously documenting the stages of dismemberment and posing of his victims. These images served as a chilling testament to Dahmer's methodical approach to murder. Among the most infamous discoveries was a drawer filled with human remains. Police also found a box containing severed hands and feet, a set of preserved genitals, and various bones. The extent of Dahmer's depravity became even clearer when authorities realized he had been attempting to create zombies by drilling into his victims' skulls and injecting them with acid. The lead medical examiner described the crime scene as more of a museum of horrors than an ordinary murder investigation. With overwhelming evidence, Dahmer confessed to his crimes, sealing his fate as one of history's most monstrous killers. Next, Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala, known as the dating game killer, was a serial killer and rapist whose crimes spanned from 1968 to 1979. He was responsible for the brutal deaths of multiple young women and girls, many of whom were lured under the guise of his interest in photography. His cunning ability to manipulate his victims, along with his chilling method of toying with them before death, made him one of the most sadistic killers in history. The investigation into Alcala's crimes began in June 1979, when 12-year-old Robin Samso disappeared while biking to her ballet class in Huntington Beach, California. Her body was discovered 12 days later in the Sierra Madre Mountains, triggering a homicide investigation that would eventually lead detectives to Alcala. Witnesses recalled seeing Samso with a man matching Alcala's description, leading to his arrest in July 1979. A search of Alcala's home revealed shocking evidence. but the most disturbing discovery was made inside his Seattle storage locker. Investigators uncovered a collection of more than 1,000 photographs, many of which depicted women and children in unsettling, sometimes sexually explicit, poses. The images ranged from outdoor settings to what appeared to be Alcala's own apartment, with some of the subjects looking visibly frightened or uncomfortable. Many of the photographs were taken with meticulous precision, showcasing Alcala's skill as a photographer and revealing his sinister obsession. Some women in the images were later identified as confirmed murder victims, while others remain unidentified to this day, raising the terrifying possibility that Alcala had more victims than those officially linked to him. In 2010, Huntington Beach police released these photographs to the public in hopes of identifying more potential victims. Beyond the disturbing photo collection, authorities also discovered the personal belongings of victims in Alcala's possession. Among them were earrings found in his Seattle locker, later confirmed to contain DNA residue matching one of his victims, Charlotte Lamb. These trophies suggested that Alcala kept mementos as a way to relive his crimes. Further investigations into cold cases led to Alcala's DNA being linked to multiple murders in Los Angeles between 1977 and 1979. Victims like Jill Barcombe, Georgia Wixted, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parenteau were all found strangled, beaten, and posed in eerie, deliberate positions, suggesting Alcala treated his victims as objects for his own twisted form of art. Alcala's manipulative nature was further displayed during his trials. He acted as his own attorney, cross-examining witnesses in a bizarre fashion, and even playing a clip of himself on the dating game as part of his defense. Despite his efforts, the jury convicted him of multiple murders, and in 2010, he was sentenced to death for the third time. Although Alcala died in 2021, his full number of victims remains unknown, and many of the women in his photographs have never been identified. His story remains one of the most chilling cases of a serial killer who used charm, intelligence, and a camera to lure his victims to their deaths. Next, son of Sam David Berkowitz, infamously known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City between 1976 and 1977, carrying out a deadly shooting spree that left 6 people dead and 7 others wounded. His crimes sparked widespread fear as he targeted young couples sitting in parked cars, striking at random and taunting police with bizarre letters filled with cryptic and disturbing messages. The terror finally came to an end on August 10, 1977, when Berkowitz was arrested outside his apartment in Yonkers. He was caught after police traced a parking ticket issued to his car near the scene of his last shooting. When authorities approached his vehicle, they found a .44 caliber revolver, the same weapon used in the attacks, along with a handwritten letter promising further violence. Berkowitz, smiling and eerily calm, greeted the arresting officers with the words, "You got me." But the true horror lay inside his apartment. As investigators stepped into his home, they were met with a nightmarish scene. The one-room studio was in complete disarray, with books, papers, and garbage strewn across the floor. The walls were covered in chilling graffiti, including satanic symbols, cryptic messages, and references to the mysterious Sam he claimed had ordered him to kill. Some writings described demonic entities, while others hinted at additional crimes yet to be discovered. Around holes in the walls, Berkowitz had scrawled unsettling notes suggesting that little baby killers lived inside, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Among the most disturbing discoveries were the diaries Berkowitz had kept since he was 21 years old. Inside, investigators found detailed accounts of more than 2,000 arson incidents he had committed throughout New York City, earning him the nickname the Phantom of the Bronx. These entries described the fires he had set, revealing a deep obsession with destruction long before his killing spree began. Investigators also uncovered a collection of letters that Berkowitz had written to police and the media, some of which had been mailed during his reign of terror. These letters, filled with bizarre ramblings and references to an entity named Sam, reinforced the belief that Berkowitz was either deeply disturbed or playing a game with law enforcement. One letter read, "I am the son of Sam. I am a monster. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat." Another letter described his supposed torment at the hands of Sam, a reference to his neighbor's black Labrador. Berkowitz later claimed that the dog had been possessed by a demon and had commanded him to kill. Among the more ominous findings was a map of New York City, with specific locations marked, possibly indicating previous crime scenes or future targets. Alongside this, police found an assortment of occult paraphernalia, including candles, pentagrams, and books on Satanism. These items fueled speculation that Berkowitz had been involved in a cult or influenced by occult beliefs, though he later claimed his involvement was exaggerated. Berkowitz ultimately confessed to the shootings, pleading guilty to 6 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he later claimed to have found religion, renouncing his past crimes. Despite his confessions, conspiracy theories still swirl around the case, with some believing he was part of a larger cult network. Finally, Alexander Pichushkin. Alexander Pichushkin, known as the chessboard killer, terrorized Moscow between 1992 and 2006, targeting unsuspecting victims in Bitsa Park. His method was brutal. He would lure people in under the guise of drinking vodka together, then attack them with a hammer, striking them repeatedly in the back of the head. To ensure they were dead, he often shoved objects into their skulls through the wounds. Pichushkin's killings were motivated by a twisted desire for power. He later claimed that murdering people made him feel alive, comparing it to a basic human need. He sought to surpass Russia's most infamous serial killer, Andrei Chikatilo, aiming for a total of 64 victims, 1 for each square on a chessboard. His reign of terror ended in June 2006 when he made a critical mistake. He convinced his co-worker, 36-year-old Marina Moskalyova, to go for a walk with him. Though suspicious, she agreed, but left a note for her son stating she was with Pichushkin and included his phone number. That night, Pichushkin murdered her in Bitsa Park, using his signature method. Authorities discovered her body the next day, and a Moscow metro ticket led them to review security footage from the subway. Surveillance footage showed Moskalyova walking with Pichushkin shortly before her death. This direct link allowed police to track him down and arrest him. Once in custody, Pichushkin confessed with chilling ease, even leading officers to multiple crime scenes. He demonstrated his killings in great detail, showing no remorse. Investigators then searched his apartment, where they made a horrifying discovery: a chessboard with numerous squares marked. Each marked square represented a murder, confirming his goal of filling the entire board with victims. Beyond the chessboard, police found a collection of disturbing items, including notebooks filled with morbid writings and personal belongings of his victims. Some of his murders had even been recorded on videotape, capturing his victims' final moments. Pichushkin was convicted on October 24, 2007, of 49 murders and 3 attempted murders, though he claimed a total of 60 victims. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the first 15 years in solitary confinement. Today, he remains imprisoned in Russia's notorious Arctic penal colony, Polar Owl, where he continues to serve his sentence, forever remembered as one of Russia's most terrifying killers. What do you think of these terrifying discoveries? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Criminal Corner so you don't miss the next ones.